Okay, everybody, I'm really happy to be here and talk about our innovator story, our entrepreneur story. We're going to talk about a full journey here. And my first guest for this part of the series is Dandelion. Dandelion, welcome to Niftorious.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so what we should do is get everyone oriented here. So maybe what we'll do first is, why don't you just say what you're doing? You can just sort of give the high level intro of Archipelago. And then maybe we'll go back to how you got to the point where we had the Archipelago genesis.
Totally. Yeah, my name is Dandelion, and I'm building Archipelago. Archipelago is a new NFT exchange built on top of Ethereum, and it's going to be focused. It's going to have a laser focus initially on generative art in general and art blocks in particular. So we're planning to build a much better experience for buying, selling, discovering, and exchanging art blocks NFTs than is currently possible.
All right, great. Okay, so how did you get here?
Well, that is depending on the scope of your question. It's potentially a question with a very long answer. I think that, there's the question of how did I get into the Web3 and crypto space in general. There's the question of how did I get into the NFT space in general, and there's the question of within the NFT space, how did I get started with Archipelago?
I like all of those questions.
You like all of those, yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll just do them from first to last because it's kind of it's perpetually zooming in. So I'm a software engineer by trade. I originally wanted to be like a finance kid, and I was planning to go to Wall Street and run a hedge fund and all this stuff. And I realized that I did a bunch of internships in finance, and I realized I did not want to become like the people who were my experienced elders and colleagues in finance. So that was a pretty bad indicator for going into that career. And I just kind of stumbled into computer science. For the first 2 years of my college experience, I'd refused to take CS courses because the intro to CS course was at 9:30 a.m. And I've always really jealously guarded my ability to wake up late in the morning. So I just kind of stubbornly did not take any CS courses. But I finally just decided to wake up early, and it was incredibly worth it because it turned out that I deeply loved programming. I really loved the creative aspect of it. I really loved the puzzle solving aspect of it. I really loved the kind of magic and emergence of being able to create out of pure thought. And so that brought me into software. And I wound up kind of going down the like traditional Silicon Valley journey. I graduated school, went straight out to Palo Alto, California. I was working for tech startups. I eventually joined Google and did a bunch of machine learning stuff. And that was like actually great because I really did enjoy the software. But I think that for me, ideologically, like the more that I thought about it, the less making the Silicon Valley ecosystem more successful felt appealing. And particularly being at Google, and like I was working on the Google Brain team, which was developing deep learning models. And I realized if you think about it, like just making AI technology better is basically right now letting these massive centralized corporate entities that have very little moral accountability, very little political accountability, making them more powerful and better able to exert control over the world. It's not really it's not really solving the problems we need solved. And I've been into crypto for a really long time because back in 2012, I wanted to buy acid off the internet. And the way to do that at the time was you went to the Silk Road and you would like get some Bitcoin. So you'd just like, get like 20 Bitcoin at a time and use that to like buy 10 tabs of acid. And so I just was like in it very early for that reason. And I saw the Ethereum white paper come out in 2014. Maybe it was 2013. Was it late? I think it was either late 2013 or early 2014 that white paper came out. And that was super cool. I just like loved it. I like saw the potential. I like wanted to like be building like hedge funds on Ethereum already. Like all the stuff that actually did happen like 6 years later. But at the time when I would go to crypto meetups, it just felt like a bunch of like people felt kind of unhinged. It was all of these people who were like gold and like Federal Reserve obsessed. It was lots of people who like didn't seem to ever shave or shower, and it was one of those things like, I don't feel like quite like this is my community, and so I stuck it out in like traditional Silicon Valley for a few years. But at the end of my time at Google, and this was like late 2017 when I was really getting kind of jaundiced on working there for a number of different reasons. And I could go into a whole aside on like my moral view outlook on corporate capitalism and the way in which you can have even incredibly idealistic organizations like Google, which started with like a bunch of like burners, like wanting to do no evil, and
Right.
like they get ground down by the incentives of shareholder capitalism. It's sad to see, but I'll leave that maybe for another podcast. But I was at Google and I found myself just completely fascinated by crypto. And I was reading all these white papers and the mechanisms were so interesting and like the vision was so inspiring. And so I figured that this was the time when finally crypto was like ready to like be real. And I had these friends who had gone a lot deeper into crypto. And so I kind of linked up with them and just quit Google and started working on SourceCred, which was this really idealistic platform, or not platform, really idealistic open source algorithm
Right.
for distributing tokens within open source communities based on their contributions. So actually kind of like an ideal thing for DAOs now with like you want to be able to pay all the contributors in the DAO and you don't have a central CEO who is going to set everyone's salary and decide the management structure. And so I worked on that for a few years. That's a whole nother interesting story with like a lot of lessons about decentralization, a lot of lessons about deploying algorithms in communities. In a very short sense, it didn't quite work out as easily or cleanly as I hoped. But that's my sort of general like how I came to be into crypto. And it's one of those things where like once you go in, you can never go back. Like the sheer, I think, sense of empowerment of like you don't need to ask permission from anyone. You don't need to like beg
Right.
other people to open their APIs. You don't need to go and like make a ton of accounts and like pay someone to get an API key and hope they don't just like revoke all your features next year because you were doing too well. It's feels like the kind of freedom of playing a video game almost, where like almost anything you can imagine, like if it's within the rules of the game, you can just go do it. So I think at this point, I'm just permanently crypto pilled. And earlier this year, I started getting into NFTs. And it's actually a particular friend. I had bought CryptoKitties back in 2017. And so I was around for that like original crypto collectible experience. And that was, it was a mess. It was like a mania that didn't really go anywhere. And it didn't even leave any cultural impact, right? It's kind of amazing to see how little CryptoKitties get referenced now, even though they were, for many, many people, the first NFT kind of experience. So this year, when people started talking about CryptoPunks, I was like, nah, I already got burned on this kitty thing. I don't need to mess with NFTs. But I started paying more attention. I eventually got like pilled on the narrative of CryptoPunks. And I think I was looking at initially just not even from the cultural lens, but from a kind of investment standpoint. CryptoPunks are the Bitcoin of NFT. They are like the original one. They're like Schelling point. They're always going to be significant in some sense because they were first. And every future NFT project is in some sense in the legacy of punks. And something I will say I'm proud of is I got pilled on this in like 2 weeks. Like it really helps, I think, in crypto to be willing to pill your stuff on stuff quickly because sometimes you need to move fast. And so I got my first punk and I started now like delving around the NFT ecosystem, kind of looking, just like keeping my eyes open, looking to see if there's something that would inspire me. And I was browsing DC Investors Gallery, actually. And I was scrolling through and he's got the X copy, he's got the autoglyphs. I was like, oh yeah, he's got the X copy. I was like, oh, he's got the ringers. I was like, oh, these are interesting. And then I got to the point where he has archetypes. And archetypes you can actually see like right behind me. These are two of the archetypes I've collected. They're a generative art algorithm by Kshetel Golid. And they kind of explore like repetition, order, chaos, symmetry. They've got these kind of like recursively laid out different structures. And I was just instantly smitten by them. They were like a piece of art that really spoke to me, especially thinking as an engineer, thinking as someone who likes to see the world in terms of regularity and in terms of systems. And generative art is always something that's fascinated me because it gets back to that original magic of programming where you can have like something come from nothing, and the idea that you can get art that is in some sense created by humans because somebody wrote the algorithm, but then in another sense entirely unexpected, I think is something like quite profound, really. So I saw these archetypes and I just started aping art blocks. My second or third purchase was an archetype cube. And it was, now valuations in art blocks are crazy all over the place. But at the time, a like expensive piece like was costing like 5 ETH, 6 ETH. That was a solid price to be paying for a piece. That was like a nice one. And this cube was on sale for 33 ETH, which was just significantly more than I had paid for anything. It was significantly more than I paid for my punk. But I was like, I love archetypes. And I think that this is a moment where I can actually get I could afford to get one of the best archetypes, whereas with cubes, with punks, I was just picking up the floor punks. So I thought that was really cool. I like talked to a friend, he like helped gas me up a little bit to buy it. And then that just set me down the path of just like just going for it with art blocks, and it's something where I just keep on seeing so much potential in generative art as a movement. Because there's this phenomenon I described to you where like out of all the generative art in the platform, there's one drop that really particularly spoke to me and pulled me in. And I've seen that happen to more people. I've seen that happen where like, for my friend Kate, Ringers were that one drop that pulled her in.
Right.
For my friend Han, Fidenza was this drop that like he immediately and like deeply fell in love with. So I think that there's a huge potential there because the space of generative art is infinite. Like everything else that makes art is significant in art. Like this is the power of programming, right? We can kind of do anything in the space of information. And so I think that over time, generative art is going to have a continually more and more profound effect on the culture. So yeah, here I was being super involved in the NFT space, in particular in the art block space. And I love the community, the artists, the creators, the team, the collectors. It's just like really good vibes. And I think a very, there's always going to be some speculators and some people who are really just attracted by the lure of easy money, especially when there's been like a boom in valuations like there has been. But I think there's a very strong core of the community that really is there out of sincere appreciation for the art. Yeah, I was kind of, meanwhile, we all use OpenSea, and that is how we buy and sell these art blocks. And OpenSea, it's just like I don't want to disrespect or disparage anyone. And I have a lot of appreciation for OpenSea because really like all of my NFT purchases substantively I've done through OpenSea. Like this cube that I love, I bought it through OpenSea. And so it's clear that like the space is really like really depends on them. But it's frustrating that we really depend on them because they're this centralized platform that is charging a lot of rent, 2.5% on every transaction. And they really are not delivering the features that are needed by the community. So whether it's stuff that's as simple as being able to find the art blocks you're looking for without going lost in a sea of scams. Like if you type Chromie Squiggle in OpenSea, you'll get like 14 different projects, and you have to really know what you're doing to figure out which one is and isn't a scam. Whether it's stuff like actually having good support for filtering the art blocks collections. Everything in art blocks is kind of hacked into OpenSea, where they've got like an OpenSea property that tells you what project it is. So you can't even explore the projects one at a time unless you're like doing some hacks. And so I think I'm not alone in the community in being pretty frustrated now that this tool that is like the tool that's like one of the lifeblood, like the thing that we all depend on, it is the market, and it's just not serving people's needs. And so they had a couple of weeks ago a particular set of kind of back-to-back like scandals where they rolled out a bad. The first one is the one that got less attention, but it's the one that actually upset me a lot more. They rolled out a bad patch to their transfer page so that if you typed in an ENS domain, you said, I want to send this NFT to dandelion.eth, it would not properly look up the address, but would instead substitute in some random address. The vast majority of random addresses are just never going to be used by anyone. They're just effectively, it's a burn address because you can't recover the key.
Right.
And so there was like a 14-hour period in which a number of people tried to use this trusted tool to send their NFTs to someone or to themselves. And instead the NFTs were irrecoverably lost. And that's really scary because I've used that exact transfer page to move my cube into my vault or to move my archetypes. And so the idea that that could have just been burned because OpenSea wasn't taking care is kind of just upsetting. And then like a week or two later, it got out that the head of product on OpenSea was front running. And he knew whenever anything was going to get featured on the front page, he would like buy a couple right before the front page listing and sell them right after. And it's just a kind of like a cynical abuse of the trust of running a platform like that.
Right.
So I think that was another thing that, compounding with the usability issues, compounding with the scam issues, has a lot of people feeling very frustrated. And I started riffing with a couple people on Twitter, most notably like DC Investor, who's been thinking very clearly about what it would take to compete with OpenSea for a while, and just kind of riffing about what it would look like to create a competitor to OpenSea. And I got a ton of people DMing me, being like, "Hey, wait, no, would you actually do this though? Like, don't just talk about it. Would you do this?
Right.
Like, can I support in some way? Like, could I offer funding? Could I like help out?" And at the time, I was working on a startup called Starforge, very early stage, with two dear friends of mine, Ian and William. And we were exploring, I won't get too into the depths, but we were exploring a way to do on-chain securities. So you could have something like shares of a company that are trading on-chain in a way that's compliant with SEC rules. And one of the people who DM'd me being like, "Hey, it seems like the iron is really hot. It seems like you should go for building something in the NFT space," was Ian, my co-founder on Starforge. And so I texted back like, "Ian, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm already working with you on a startup." And he's kind of like, "Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But this seems like a really good thing. You should go for it."
That's fun.
And so that kind of gave me the enthusiasm to just, it didn't just give me the enthusiasm, it gave me the permission, because I would have been really reluctant to start a new thing because I'm already working with Ian on something.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But the truth is that we kind of didn't have that much conviction on Starforge. It's just like a lot of dealing with regulations. It's going to be a long, like, kind of messy journey.
Right.
And so I tweeted just being like, "Okay, after getting a ton of encouragement and DMs, I'm going to create an art blocks focused OpenSea competitor." And I said that I'm going to do it. I'm aiming to do it in 2 weeks. And the reason for this 2-week timeline is that Ian was about to go on vacation for 2 weeks, and I've been wanting to make generative art. So I had planned to take 2 weeks off and just focus on making my own generative art. It's something I've dabbled with a lot in the past. I thought it would be really fun. But then I had a chat with this kind of friend, mentor figure named Gregory. And he called me and was like, "Dandelion, I want you to know, I think you're already an artist. You need to just like follow your own sense of joy in creation. And like, that'll be like the path to art." And I found that like thinking about making an OpenSea competitor for art blocks, I felt a lot of joy of creation. So it's like, okay, I've got this 2-week art window. How much of building an OpenSea competitor, how much of building Archipelago can I do, where it's in one part like just an art project, like the art project, except the art is creating a crypto native startup super quickly. So yeah, I tweeted that. I got far more enthusiasm and engagement than I expected or have ever really seen on Twitter before. I think my follower count about tripled. And so that indicated to me that like this really is onto something. So I recruited William from Starforge, and we just went super fast starting off on the smart contracts. And I recognize that now, like, I'm just diving into the story here, which I assume checks out. Like, I'm kind of cool. I've moved off the 3 questions just into the meat of the story.
That's the next stage. You've done your own segue. It's perfect.
Cool. There you go. Yeah, so we just got started to like hacking on the smart contracts. And something I'll say about working in the Web3 space is I love working in Solidity. It's amazing how empowering it is to have a programming language where the state is not just random state on your particular computer. It is like the state of the chain. It is the state of the world.
Oh, right.
And you compare it to like, writing like I used to think JavaScript was the most powerful programming language because it's a programming language that can manipulate data just as well as Python or C or what have you. But it also can very directly put information in front of the user through manipulating pixels. And so that's like a powerful additional capability. But Solidity is a whole nother tier above because you're not just putting information out there. You are, in a certain sense, creating truth, right? You're creating the truth of the world. The truth is, I have this NFT. The truth is, you have this token balance. Like, because it is so broadly agreed upon, it just becomes like, I would say it becomes like an inter-objective truth. But this is another side. So yeah, we got to work hacking on the smart contracts. We wrote this really clean market contract that just does all the basic things you'd want from an NFT marketplace. You can you can bid for NFTs, you can offer NFTs for sale. We're only targeting Ethereum, so you're just bidding an ETH or WETH. But we won't have USDC bids, we won't have like other bids. So just trying to make something that's simple, that's like minimal, that's easy to like understand and does one thing really well and really efficiently. And I was posting regular progress updates. And we were actually doing quite well on this 2-week timeline, because we started on Thursday, and by Monday the contracts were basically finished. And I had all these people who were like following along for the journey, super excited for like the fast pace. And I had one person who reached out to me and was like, dude, like the pace you're trying to move at is a huge mistake. You need to slow down. Like there's not a reason to like rush actually this hard. You're not going to like miss this opportunity if you're building the right thing. And you need to be more cautious about the smart contract risk. Mm-hmm. And the person who reached out to me this message was not some like random spectator just like shooting off with their own opinion. Mm-hmm. It was Snowfro, who is the creator of art blocks. So I feel like for me, like thinking as a founder, like if there's one person who's like words of caution I need to really think about, it's probably the person who was the founder of like this whole space in which we're trying to operate on. So I was like a little bit frustrated because I really did like this 2-week timeline, and I wanted to prove how much was possible in the Web3 space, how quickly. And I took his advice and I slowed down. And in retrospect, I think this was clearly the right decision for 2 reasons. One is that once we slowed down, we started like doing more and more like security reviews, and we did find a pretty serious bug that I had added while. It's funny, it was one of those like late added features. I was like, I was asking some collector friends of mine, like, hey, do you think we need support for bundles in the market? Mm-hmm. And one person was like, no, I feel like they're complicated and they always make things go wrong. Another person was like, no, but it really is useful for a reason like X, Y, and Z. And I wound up deciding to put them in. But friend 2 may be right in that it will be useful, but friend 1 was right in that bundles are complicated and can make things go wrong. Because that was where we got this attack surface where you could kind of like execute a bundle sale, and then during the middle of the bundle sale do a different sale, and then kind of get the state to be weird and steal some WETH. But I think the broader reason why slowing down was the right decision is because I was carrying over a 2-week timeline from making an art project. And by carrying over that timeline, I was kind of prioritizing like, yeah, I want to like build Archipelago kind of like as performance art. Like right. I really like operating under tight deadlines with engineering because I think it's going to be fun, like the hackathon experience. But the truth is that Archipelago is not just a piece of art. It's going to be a product, and it's going to be, a platform. It's going to be a tool. It's going to be infrastructure, and it's going to be infrastructure in a market with very high stakes. And so I think that the only thing that's actually like respectful towards the users is to treat the infrastructure role as the most important. And, you already heard me saying with OpenSea that the thing I was really most frustrated by was I felt that they kind of defaulted on some of their responsibility as infrastructure to take care and not burn people's NFTs. So it'd be pretty poor form for me in Archipelago if I like rushed things to make a statement and then didn't actually take time to like dot every I and cross every T. So where we are now is we've slowed down a fair bit. We're out of the 2-week window, and we're kind of now looking more on like a few month timeline of, yes, we still want to move fast. The iron is super hot. People do really need better tools than OpenSea. Mm-hmm. But let's not rush. Let's do this intentionally, and let's like really get this right and build the right thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to say now that we've like, Starforge, this startup that was doing the kind of tokenized securities. The thing that was by far the strongest about it as a startup was the team. Ian, William, and I work really well together. We've got a super complementary set of skills. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to say we've now just like reoriented that startup and are just going to executing with the same team, but in a different direction on Archipelago.
Oh, so you're all so the gang is all back together after
yeah, the gang is all back together.
Start for like 24 hours or something like that.
Yeah, it was a start apart for 2 weeks while Ian was on vacation. It was just me and William hacking an Archipelago, and then Ian came back from vacation. It was like, oh, cool, yeah, this seems like this is really got legs. Let's like run for it.
Nice. Okay, cool. And you actually said something in a tweet recently, which I think seems like, potentially a good follow on to what you just talked about. And I'll just state it. So people can go to Twitter, and I recommend you do for Dandelion. It's Dandelion_ETH, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's an Archipelago one, which is Archipelago_art, but more prolific on the Dandelion.
Yeah, I've mostly tweeted through Dandelion.
Yeah. So you said some Web 2 ideology just isn't right for Web 3. And Web 2, we have blitz scaling and move fast and break things, but our generative grails are too precious to break. You all deserve better from your tools and from your builders. And that seems like a reflection related to this idea saying, oh, we need to slow down.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
It's an interesting point too, because Web3 is very new, and a lot of people haven't yet grokked the difference. And some people think it's just one difference, decentralized, for example, or they think there's maybe a couple of differences, that maybe it's immutable or maybe it's transparent. But there's really a lot of baggage from Web 2 that we could inadvertently bring over to Web 3, and it would be completely inappropriate.
I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm just thinking what you just said, and it's like, I actually I've got a very clear intuition for what Web3 means, but I kind of understand it in a very gestalt kind of it's a movement way. And I think that trying to reduce it down to the specifics of what are the distinctions from Web 2 is like actually quite an interesting exercise. And like framing it, like I feel like Web 3 is in many ways like a kind of callback to Web 1,
Yeah.
But that's also, I saw the very tail end of Web 1, but really like just given my age, being 30, I think I've mostly experienced Web 2.
Sure. Well, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about that as Web 2 being a callback to Web 1.
Web 3 being a callback to Web 1.
Oh, Web 3 being a callback to Web 1.
In the sense of like Web 1, my sense is that it was actually much more community driven. It was much more like grounds up, grassroots innovation. Anyone can make a GeoCities. And then it switched in Web 2 into being like, you do still have, like Reddit, you do have like community organization, but everything is much more like there's a particular like container you operate in. There's a particular terms of service you agree to. There's a particular like infrastructure you're allowed to use. And there's a particular like mechanism of power that's going to police you. And in Web 3 with the NFT community, it's just like anything goes, anyone can like create their own way of organizing.
Well, it goes back to the standards piece, that we have an open standard essentially, or we have several open standards. It's always great when you have standards. There's so many to choose from. So absolutely, I buy into that. But it was making me think that when you talked about Web 3, or you mentioned Web 2 briefly, I was thinking, the whole idea of Web 2 was it changed the nature of the interaction model on the web, because it was completely broadcast before that. And then it became interactive, and to a certain extent could be multicast, many-to-many relationships. And that was really the promise of it. But as we see it's evolved, it's really become more broadcast because the centralization has been so acute. You think about like the creators in the space, clearly a lot of them are using some of these many-to-many platforms, but they've actually mirrored the many-to-many platforms, which are centralized. And so then they wind up being one-to-many in the way they interact. And I think that's really interesting. I have this theory that Discord is the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3, because it teaches people what Web 3 looks like, even though ironically it's a centralized organization as well. It just allows you to interact in a decentralized way. That's all where it's easy to traverse the different ecosystems within that. And while I don't necessarily think that Discord is the primary model we'll see in Web 3 for communication and interaction and things like that, I think it's one of the pillars that we're going to see in the space. And it's a really accessible one for right now for people. like compared to something like Decentraland, for example, which I think is less accessible for people. So in any event, I really like that characteristic you talked about, and this idea of not carrying over the baggage of Web 2. And just because
Yeah,
something's
I
right in
want
Web
to
2 doesn't mean it's right in Web 3.
riff on the Discord thing a bit more because I think that there's actually a really interesting point there. I think it's interesting to compare Discord and Slack because, nominally speaking, Discord and
Yes.
Slack are like nearly identical products, right?
Mhm.
You have a server, you've got channels in the server, you've got people in the channels, you've got messages, you can DM people. And there's one huge difference, which is that on Slack, it is every server is its own closed ecosystem. And so you can't, if you're kicked out of a server, you can't DM anyone in the server because you're just not there anymore. So it's very, very siloed. And Discord provides a similar experience while being non-siloed. So you can just have your same account in many different servers. You can talk to anyone from any of your servers. It's very easy for people in one server to then invite you to another server. And I think that actually is a really good metaphor between Web2 and Web3, where Discord feels like open infrastructure, and Slack feels like proprietary infrastructure. Now, as a matter of fact, they both are proprietary infrastructure.
Yep.
But I think you're right that in terms of like the ways in which the user experience is different, Discord is quite Web3-ish. And I think that just over the course, like I started using Discord for my Web3 community SourceCred back in beginning of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it felt like everyone was using Slack and like gamers were on Discord, but like not really many other people. And it feels like Discord has gained a massive, like really, really become much bigger than gaming and has really become this like kind of general purpose community infrastructure in the intervening years. And I think that a lot of its success does come from this Web3-ishness that's very easy to cross-pollinate and it's very easy to like for servers to come together and then result in new servers getting created and so forth.
Yeah. Well, you're smarter than me because you're able to grok this within moments of hearing the idea. And it took me months to sort of draw the parallels between the two. But I really like the way you've built on that. And it was one of the things. I've been a very heavy Slack user for years. I've also used Discord. I was brought into it originally through a project where someone had an app, and it was this voice interactive app, which is probably not important there. But I was using it. And it was sort of foreign territory, but I was like, okay, this is fine, but didn't really spend much time with it. I had a Slack community for some things that I were doing. I was in many. But I just, when I was, particularly this year, when I was thinking about building more community features around some of the things I was doing, I just looked at Slack and I was like, I've got a great group of people in Slack and it's going to be really hard to migrate them, but I have to migrate them because Slack is the wrong model going forward.
Yeah. Makes
Okay.
sense. And I really hope that we're going to do that migration on a much broader sense because I think Facebook was down all day yesterday. Ethereum was fine. I hope we'll see a lot more migration out of these proprietary systems.
That's right. I was actually thinking when you're talking about this idea of these sort of big centralized organizations and you're sort of in your bucket, I was thinking the only thing that might actually work across them is some sort of OAuth shared login. But even that breaks down because they're centralized. People who had Facebook logins yesterday, I think, were in trouble trying to get into a lot of their applications.
Yes, and I think the deeper issue is not really a technical one, it's one of incentives, which is that each platform would rather not have an OAuth because they want to get to own as much of the relationship and as much of the like data about like their customer as they can. And I think that's it's really hard to own your own identity in Web 2. Sure, you may like own your Twitter handle, but Twitter could just decide that you violated some obscure clause in the terms of service, and good luck ever getting it back. Whereas, there's no degree which you can get canceled, which results in you losing your ENS domain, and I think that's a great property of the system.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get back to your founder story. So you talked a little bit about smart contract. What else have you accomplished since you started? Well, actually, let me ask you a question. Is the founding date September 15th? Is that correct?
Well, I would say whatever day I sent that tweet on.
Yeah, it was September 15th.
I described. Yeah, there you go. September 15th. That's a nice clean day.
I know I founded a different business in September 15th, 2016. So I was like, yeah, that's great. So what have you accomplished other than some of the smart contract and then obviously the auditing to fix your bug? What else have you accomplished in that period of time?
Let's see. What have we accomplished? So I think the number one thing is getting the team together. Like the fact that this is like a team of three really talented people who are aligned and just are planning to execute on this together is so much more powerful than it just being me working on it. In particular, like I'm not the best Solidity auditor. I'm far from being a good or proficient front end designer. And so I think the team that we have, it's got like, me doing like generalist stuff, love writing smart contracts, general purpose programming, and also like I know this market really well and I know the big players in it. We've got William, who's just a like virtuoso programmer and particularly strong on Solidity, and like he's the one who's auditing, like found the bug and so forth. And we've got Ian, who's a really talented designer, a really talented front end engineer, and also a really knowledgeable lawyer and like regulatory policy expert in crypto,
Really?
which is just such a unicorn skill set, to be with like an engineer and a really knowledgeable lawyer. And I hope that we won't need too much of his regulatory and policy chops, but with the regulatory environment around crypto, you never know. So it's great to have on the team. As far as the work that we've done, we've written the smart contracts, and I would say they're in a fairly finished state. We're still auditing them. We're still writing documentation for them. We're planning to write a really detailed document on the security model for the contracts and on all of the different like surface areas we need to defend, so that when we start inviting outside eyes to audit it, they can like ramp up really well and do really effective audits, and also like not just be understanding the code, but also understanding our assumptions around the code, which either makes it easier for them to find vulnerabilities in the code or like lets them, they can like kind of flag that we're missing some assumptions. I think it'll be a really good investment as far as being able to like efficiently and effectively and thoroughly become persuaded that these contracts are safe. We've started a lot on the backend work. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we're focusing. Oh, maybe I should actually talk about the feature set real quick, because I think that's a pretty interesting to explore. I'm going to assume that people who are interested at this point are people who have experience trading NFTs on OpenSea.
Fair enough.
Because that's kind of the context in which this archipelago is getting created. So we're going to have all of the features that one expects from OpenSea. You're going to be able to bid on NFTs and offer NFTs for sale without an on-chain action, off-chain bidding and asking, so you don't need to pay gas on all of these. You're going to be able to cancel your bids and asks by doing an on-chain action. And that's much like OpenSea, although we're adding a little bit of extra features so that you can kind of cancel linked groups of orders together. So OpenSea is something that happens, and I'm getting really in the weeds here, but something happens. If you list something for sale at 70, and then you list it for sale at 60, and then you list it for sale at 50, and then you're like, oh wait, actually I don't want to sell it. You actually have to cancel those three things independently. And it's something that has always bugged me. So we're putting in a way to fix it. And I think this really helps that, I've been a power user of OpenSea now for more than half a year. So I have a really, really, really good sense of every little thing that's just doesn't quite work right. And we're going to get them to all work just like right in Archipelago. But the really big feature, the feature I think that's going to make the biggest difference in terms of making Archipelago a more functional, deeper liquidity market, is we're going to enable floor bids across an entire collection and floor bids across a particular trade. And so if we think about like Fidenzas, for example, the lowest priced Fidenza is at like, let's say it's 170 ETH today. I haven't taken a look. But if you go into every individual Fidenza, you'll find that there's a bot that's bid on every single Fidenza, and it's bid something much lower, let's say like 75 ETH. And this is a really useful feature to have, just like a bid on any Fidenza. It's very useful for sellers if they just need fast liquidity and they need to like sell something immediately, maybe because there's some other NFT they really want to get. And right now, the only people who are able to make those floor bids are botters, because there's no built-in way to do it. And so you need to go and just do this manually via a bot. And it really limits the amount of liquidity you have in the market, because there's only a couple people with these bots and they don't have that much liquidity. And so ideally, we would just have every collector able to make these bids. And that's just technologically not supported by OpenSea. So we're going to add this to Archipelago as just a first class concept where you can bid on a whole collection at a time. or you can even bid on specific traits. So maybe you say, okay, I want a chromy squiggle, but I don't want any chromy squiggle. I want a fuzzy one because they look the best, in my opinion. Actually, I like bold squiggles, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay.
If you wanted to make a fuzzy squiggle floor bid, you'd be able to just like kind of just select that category, put in the ETH amount, and that will just work. Now, for this to just work, we need to have accurate data on all of the traits of every token that was created through art blocks. And so that's the other piece of infrastructure that we've been building out so far, is the backend service that just kind of like caches all the attributes from art blocks, which we're then going to use to like write and push on chain so that this will actually be like queryable on chain, so you can figure out, if I said I bid on a fuzzy squiggle and you're trying to sell me squiggle 5129, is it or is it not fuzzy? Yeah, I'm thinking as far as features, the other thing, this isn't a technical feature, but I think it is a differentiator people will care about a lot. We're lowering the fees quite dramatically on Archipelago compared to OpenSea. OpenSea charges 2.5%,
Right.
and we are going to charge 1%. And we're going to split up that 1% in an interesting way. We're going to have 0.5% get paid to the Archipelago backend, which we could call like the mempool or the SIG pool, where all of the off-chain bids are stored so that you can then publish, you can execute on them. And we're going to have 0.5% go to the front end. And the reason we're splitting up the fees this way is that we actually want to support there being a whole ecosystem of community-run front ends around Archipelago. My read here is that OpenSea, a big issue is just that the front end doesn't support art blocks very well. And so if they had been an open source system where anyone can just write their own OpenSea front end and just plug in, then we probably would have seen this problem fixed quite a while ago, because there are a lot of talented people who have built better UIs. So that's part of the vision here, and it's part of the inspiration for the name, is we want Archipelago to be kind of a continuous thing that consists of many individual islands, which are themselves self-contained. And so I imagine, the Cryptodes community has just blown up in the last 2 weeks. And I imagine, them being able to fork our front end that we use for art blocks and then, skin it, customize it, vibe it as appropriate, and then just have that be working. And since it would all be going through the kind of shared Archipelago backend, you could even have within an individual project, you could have many different front ends that are used by different sets of users or have different features, and they would all still interoperate with each other cleanly.
Okay, so just to break that down, because I want to make sure I follow you. So half of the fee goes to the back end and half to the front end. What do you mean by that? I mean, like, I understand that, but like, so you collect a bunch of ETH, it's sitting in these, I guess, wallets, probably.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That's the funding that you have in order to increase the robustness of the feature set in the back end and the front end, or?
So what I mean is this. So at the smart contract level, there's no hard-coded royalties. It's just an open source kind of neutral market. And each bid and each ask, each order basically have some royalties they specify. So the traditionally there's a practice of paying royalties to the artist on every resale.
Right.
And the convention is the seller pays that royalty, and it's 5% in the art blocks ecosystem. So the seller would be submitting an offer that says, I, as the seller, I'm offering this piece for that price. And if it sells, I'm going to pay 5% to the artist. I'm going to pay 2.5% to art blocks, and so forth. And so the idea with Archipelago is for an order to successfully execute, a couple things need to happen. There needs to be some front end where a user went and created an order and signed that message.
Mm-hmm.
That front end needs to get that message needs to get passed to a backend, to a database, mm-hmm. where it's stored, and then we find out if there's any other order that like is matching. Like I bid 10 ETH on this piece, and you also offered it for 10 ETH, so we can transact with each other. And if there is this, if there is a matching order, then you want to give that back to the front end and let the user just execute against it. I explained that in a little bit of a confusing way, but suffice it to say, you need to have a back end that's storing the orders to execute against them. And you need to have a front end where people are seeing these orders and people are creating new orders.
Well, you're storing it
The,
you're storing it separately from the chain.
yeah, it's not going on chain. And the reason for that is that doing anything on chain is very expensive in terms of gas. And you don't actually, if I'm just going and saying, hey, Creatorius, I offer, 100 ETH for your ape, let's say. If I have to go and pay like $50 in gas in order to put a bid on your ape,
Yeah,
maybe I won't even bother because maybe this is like the second or third ape that I want. So it's like not worth the extra $50 in gas. So instead, I just go and sign a message and saying anyone who presents this message on chain can take 50 of my weighted ether and give me back this particular ape. And so that greatly reduces the friction of making orders. So it's a really important feature. Hopefully someday we'll have like layer 2, we'll have lower gas costs. We'll be able to do the order book on chain because then it will be much more uncensorable. It'll be permissionless. I think that'll be better for everyone. But the technical limitations being what they are today, we kind of need to have some more centralized backend that is collecting all of these orders so that you can retrieve them despite them not being on chain.
right. But you're still,
now,
you use the C word, so people are going to be concerned. But I think what you're doing is it's basically a service, and so on the back end, when it's doing the interrogation, you're looking what's in the database, but you're probably also pinging the chain to make sure that asset hasn't moved in some other type of front end. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I mean, so technically speaking, like the back end, let's just call it the mempool, right? It's a pool of orders that exist. If I want to buy a squiggle, then let's say I just want to like buy it now on a squiggle, right? Then I want to find out what are all of the orders that are valid orders where someone has offered a squiggle for sale. And then I can get any of those orders and then I can use that order to fill it. Because I can just go to the chain and I can be like, here's the order. Here's the order is this person offered to like sell me a squiggle. Here's the signature of that person signing that message so that you know it's legit. And it's not just me like making up an order, like they must be real because they signed it. And then I'm able to execute and like pay this person ETH and get back a squiggle. In the event that that squiggle has already moved, then the order is invalid.
Right.
Because if you actually tried to execute it, the code would just revert because it's like, oh, well, we tried to move this NFT, but it's not actually owned by the person who this order says it's owned by. So there is you do filter on the front end, and you don't show those invalid orders just to save the user gas.
Right.
Because otherwise, if they tried to use it, it would just fail on chain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say that the front end and back end are separately getting fees, what I mean is that when a front end creates an order, they are specifying what all the royalties are going to be. And so as a front end, if you're running the Creatorius Rex front end, you can go and say, okay, the rule of my front end is I'll make orders, but every order I create will pay 0.5% to Creatorius Rex. And if you don't like that, just go and use a different front end. The back end, which Archipelago is going to be running, is going to have the rule for our back end is we will accept an order from any front end, and you can charge whatever fees you want. Just pay the artists, because we're not going to support people like shortchanging the artists, and pay Archipelago 0.5%. And so if somebody didn't like that, if they were like, this is crazy, the Archipelago's backend is charging 0.5%, it's all open source. They could just spin up their own memory pool, their own mempool that has a different rule about order inclusion. But the idea is now that if somebody wants to go and create their own front end in the Archipelago ecosystem, maybe, for example, it's a site that's dedicated to selling Fidenzas, those 50 basis points of fees that on the Archipelago front end we pay to ourselves, they could instead say, oh, we're going to pay 50 basis points. We're going to pay it to maintain this community-run Fidenza site. Or we're going to use it for some charity, or we're going to use it for like any fund a DAO, whatever they want it to be. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that we want there to be an economic incentive to build more front ends. I want to make it so that the front end that we create is not privileged, either like in terms of features or in terms of economics. We want it to be a really even playing field for communities to build on top of it.
Right. So I'll tell you my summary of what I think you said. So Archipelago has the backend service. which you're running. Other people could replicate it. That doesn't really matter right now, but you're going to run one, and 0.5 ETH or 0.5% of the transaction is going to go back. And then anyone on the front end basically can have the other 0.5 of the 1%, because they have their own front end. And they could change that. They have the control to do that. But that's just sort of the standard model that you're implementing.
Yep, exactly.
So I guess, geez, I have so many questions. We're going to wrap this up in just a minute. We'll talk about front ends and front end partners in our subsequents, because everybody who's gotten this far in, hopefully this is going to be first of many conversations between Dandelion and I, because he's going to be talking about
I use they them pronouns.
I'm sorry. They're going to be talking about this project over time, and so we'll have an opportunity to get into a lot more of these things. But I think there's two things that I'd like to just close on, and the first is you talked about liquidity really quickly a few minutes ago, and there's one type of liquidity is there's what you talked about in terms of the ability of people to transact, because there's novel ways for bid and ask to be matched. So I think that's really interesting. What about liquidity just in terms of total number of users? Because I assume that what we're talking about is we're not talking about people only listing on these sites that might be running based on Archipelago. They might be listed other places as well. And when we think about any type of marketplace, liquidity is the big challenge. So you need buyers and you need sellers. And so in this case, what's your conviction behind ensuring that you have that type of liquidity?
Yeah. So I think that liquidity is best understood like one project at a time. And my evidence for this would be that, almost for almost everything that's being traded is being traded in OpenSea, except CryptoPunks. CryptoPunks predate OpenSea, and the liquidity kind of initially congealed around the CryptoPunks website and the CryptoPunks front end and smart contract. And that is it's a very first stages market. It's got a couple disadvantages. When you bid on a punk, every bid and every offer is on chain, so you're paying gas all the time. And when you bid on a punk, it actually locks up your ETH. You are depositing that ETH in the contract.
Right.
So it's very capital inefficient to be bidding on punks. You can't just bid on the 2 punks you want and see which one will go through. And so it's got a couple of disadvantages, but because the liquidity is always there, has always been there, it's never migrated to OpenSea. So if you want to buy a punk today, you're going to almost certainly do it on that site. And I think what that shows is that you can kind of think about the NFT marketplace as each community is kind of one separate market. There's network effects to having them all be on OpenSea, but each one is kind of a separate, distinct pool of liquidity. And so the goal for Archipelago is to really focus on art blocks and really create an experience that's much better for everyone, much better for new users onboarding, much better for serious collectors who want to be able to do stuff like floor bids, much better for everyone who's paying lower fees, and also just much better for exploring the project in terms of filtering, finding traits, and so forth. And so the plan there is to essentially build a materially better experience and then bring people on board through really working closely and engaging with the community, and maybe even doing stuff like trying to bring over one project at a time, and for being okay, you know what, this next drop that's coming up, let's all agree that we want to try Archipelago on this one rather than going to OpenSea. And I think it is going to be the biggest challenge for Archipelago, because there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community, there's a lot of support, but it is also the built-in habit of tens of thousands of people to go to OpenSea for liquidity on art blocks. So we'll kind of have to work through that.
Well, it's a really savvy strategy, I think, because art blocks has such a great brand and there's a lot of interest in that. And so I believe that the people who are interested in it will be motivated enough to try something else out or to go to a different place than is their habit. Now that might reduce the total pool of bidders, but I have a feeling that the draw for art blocks, just because they're particularly just the way they curate it, is so good that's a good point. But this sort of leads to the second question. So, and the final question for today. So what we're looking at here is it's almost like you're solving this problem for art blocks, but art blocks is also the model representation that other people can then see, and they'll build their own marketplaces, which might be marketplace of one. They might just, like you mentioned, Cryptodes. They might just do a Cryptodes marketplace on their website using Archipelago as a backend, or they could offer multiple collections and be another competitor to like an OpenSea with just a modified front end. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, and I think that probably like Archipelago, like the team, I like the name Archipelago because it's got space to grow. I think it was very clever. For example, Jeff Bezos back in the '90s, he's running this internet bookstore, and he doesn't call it like books online. He calls it Amazon. That left a lot of like room to kind of like expand the scope. I think with Archipelago, once we have things working really well for art blocks and we've got like a great collector experience, that's like, okay, what are the art blocks communities also collecting? Well, we've got like Def Beef, that's super close adjacency. I know from talking to a number of the artists on art blocks that some of them are thinking of maybe launching their own smart contracts so they can start to have more direct control and do more interesting things on the Solidity side. And so I think, for example, I think that I saw that Hideki, the creator of Singularity, I think he might be doing some of his next drops on his own infrastructure. So yeah, I think that there's just going to be a lot of like adjacent projects that will kind of coexist well under the same umbrella.
All right, Dandelion, this is great. I'm really excited that we're doing this. I love the story. I love the origin story that we went through today. I think it's going to be really compelling to see how this develops over time. So maybe we'll leave everybody with, how should they keep track of what's going on? Obviously, every week we'll be getting back together, or most weeks, I assume. But how should they keep track of what's going on in between? Go to follow your Twitter.
Yeah.
Is that the best way?
I would say right now, following my dandelion.eth Twitter is the best way to keep abreast. Probably at some point I'll start using the Archipelago art Twitter a little bit more systematically, but I'm sure I'll be mentioning it a lot in my profile when that comes time. So yeah, following me on Twitter is a good way to keep in touch. And yeah, I look forward to being back on the show next week.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Dandelion. We'll be back soon. And until we get back together, happy hunting.
Cool. Take care.